July the 25th. I suggest, in the sense of taking responsibility for your actions, we lay those papers on the table. They're not the secrets to the nuclear bomb. Secondly, we got upset when he took the whole thing. But to the ordinary American out there who doesn't know where the oil fields are in Kuwait, they're near the border. We told him he could take the northern part of Kuwait, and when he took the whole thing, we went nuts. And if we didn't tell him that, why won't we even let the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee see the written instructions for Ambassador Glaspie?
On that. That gets to the national honor. We did not say to Saddam Hussein, Ross, you can take the northern part of Kuwait.
Well,
that is absolutely absurd. Glaspie has testified, and Glaspie's papers have been presented to the United States Senate.
Okay.
Now, please,
if you have time, go through Nexus and Lexus, pull all the old news articles, look at what Ambassador Glaspie said all through the fall and what have you, and then look at what she and Kelly and all the others in states said at the end when they were trying to clean it up, and talk to any head of any of those key committees in the Senate. They will not let them see the written instructions given to Ambassador Glaspie, and I suggest that in a free society owned by the people, the American people ought to know what we told Ambassador Glaspie to tell Saddam Hussein, because we spent a lot of money and risked lives and lost lives in that effort and did not accomplish most of our objectives. We got Kuwait back to the emir, but he's still got his nuclear, his chemical, his bacteriological, and he's still over there, right? I'd like to see those written instructions. Sorry.
Mr. President, when you just make sure that everybody knows what's going on here. When you responded directly to Mr. Perot,
yes,
you violated the rule, your rule. Now, I'm more than willing.
I apologize. When I make a mistake, I say
no. I just want to make sure that everybody. I just want to make sure everybody understands. If you all want to change the rules, we can do it.
No, I don't.
Okay,
I apologize for it. But that one got right to the national honor. And
okay,
I'm sorry.
but Governor Clinton, you have a minute.
Susan, I don't agree that there are no women and minorities in important positions in my campaign. There are many. But I think even more relevant is my record at home. For most of my time as governor, a woman was my chief of staff. An African-American was my chief cabinet officer. An African-American was my chief economic development officer. It was interesting today. There was a story either today or yesterday in the Washington Post about my economic programs. And my chief budget officer and my chief economic officer were both African-Americans, even though the Post didn't mention that, which I think is a sign of progress. The National Women's Political Caucus gave me an award, one of their Good Guy Awards, for my involvement of women in high levels of government, and I've appointed more minorities to positions of high level in government than all the governors in the history of my state combined before me. So that's what I'll do as president. I don't think we've got a person to waste. And I think I owe the American people a White House staff, a cabinet, and appointments that look like America, but that meet high standards of excellence, and that's what I'll do.
All right, next question goes to you, Mr. Perot. It's a two-minute question, and Helen will ask it. Helen?
Mr. Perot, what proof do you have that Saddam Hussein was told that he could have the oil? Do you have any actual proof, or are you asking for the papers? I really came in with another question, is what is this penchant you have to investigate everyone? Are those accusations correct? Investigating your staff, investigating the leaders of the grassroots movement, investigating associates of your family?
No. They're not correct. And if you look at my life until I got involved in this effort, I was one person. And then after the Republican Dirty Tricks group got through with me, I'm another person, which I consider an absolutely sick operation. And all of you in the press know exactly what I'm talking about. They investigated every single one of my children. They investigated my wife. They interviewed all of my children's friends from childhood on. They went to extraordinary, sick lengths. And I just found it amusing that they would take 2 or 3 cases where I was involved in lawsuits and would engage an investigator. The lawyers would engage an investigator, which is common. And the only difference between me and any other businessman that has the range of businesses I have is I haven't had that many lawsuits. So that's just another one of those little Fruit Loopy things they make up to try to, instead of facing issues, to try to redefine a person's that's running against them. This goes on night and day. I will do everything I can if I get up there to make Dirty Tricks a thing of the past. One of the 2 groups has raised it to an art form. It's a sick art form. Now let's go back to Saddam Hussein. We gave Ambassador Glaspie written instructions. That's a fact. We've never let the Congress and the Foreign Relations Senate Intelligence Committee see them. That's a fact. Ambassador Glaspie did a lot of talking right after July the 25th, and that's a fact, and it's all the newspapers, and you pull all of it at once and read it, and I did, and it's pretty clear what she and Kelly and the other key guys around that thing thought they were doing. Then, at the end of the war, when they had to go testify about it, their stories are a total disconnect from what they said in August, September, and October. So I say, this is very simple. Saddam Hussein released a tape, as you know, claiming it was a transcript of their meeting where she said, we will not become involved in your border dispute, and in effect, you can take the northern part of the country. We later said, no, that's not true. I said, well, this is simple. What were her written instructions? We guard those like the secrets to the atomic bomb, literally. Now, I say, whose country is this? This is ours. Who will get hurt if we lay those papers on the table? The worst thing is, it's a mistake. Nobody did any of this with evil intent. I just object to the fact that we cover up and hide things, whether it's Iran-Contra, Iraq-Gate, or you name it. It's a steady stream.
Right. Governor Clinton, you have 1 minute.
Let's take Mr. Bush for the moment at his word. He's right. We don't have any evidence, at least, that our government did tell Saddam Hussein he could have that part of Kuwait. And let's give him the credit he deserves for organizing Operation Desert Storm and Desert Shield. It was a remarkable event. But let's look at where I think the real mistake was made. In 1988, when the war between Iraq and Iran ended, we knew Saddam Hussein was a tyrant. We had dealt with him because he was against Iran. The enemy of my enemy maybe is my friend. All right, the war's over. We know he's dropping mustard gas on his own people. We know he's threatened to incinerate half of Israel. Several government departments, had information that he was converting our aid to military purposes and trying to develop weapons of mass destruction. But in late '89, the president signed a secret policy saying we were going to continue to try to improve relations with him. And we sent him some sort of communication on the eve of his invasion of Kuwait that we still wanted better relations. So I think what was wrong, I give credit where credit is due, but the responsibility was in coddling Saddam Hussein when there was no reason to do it and when people at high levels in our government knew he was trying to do things that were outrageous.
Mr. President, you have a minute. I'm sorry.
Well, it's awful easy when you're dealing with 90/90 hindsight. We did try to bring Saddam Hussein into the family of nations. He did have the fourth largest army. All our Arab allies out there thought we ought to do just exactly that. And when he crossed the line, I stood up and looked into the camera and I said, this aggression will not stand. And we formed a historic coalition and we brought him down. And we destroyed the fourth army, largest army. And the battlefield was searched and there wasn't one single iota of evidence that any U.S. weapons were on that battlefield. And the nuclear capability has been searched by the United Nations, and there hasn't been one single scintilla of evidence that there's any U.S. technology involved in it. And what you're seeing on all this Iraq gate is a bunch of people who were wrong on the war, trying to cover their necks here, and try to do a little revisionism. And I cannot let that stand, because it isn't true. Yes, we had grain credits for Iraq, and there isn't any evidence that those grain credits were diverted into weaponry. None. None whatsoever. And so I just have to say, it's fine. You can't say there, Governor Clinton, and say, well, I think I've supported the minority, let sanctions work, or wish it would go away, but I would have voted with the majority. Come on, that's not leadership.
All right, the next question goes to Governor Clinton, and Gene Gibbons will ask it. Gene?
Governor, an important aspect of leadership is, of course, anticipating problems. During the 1988 campaign, there was little or no mention of the savings and loan crisis that has cost the American people billions and billions of dollars. Now there are rumblings that a commercial bank crisis is on the horizon. Is there such a problem, sir? If so, how bad is it, and what will it cost to clean it up?
Gene, there is a problem in the sense that there are some problem banks, and on December 19th, new regulations will go into effect, which will, in effect, give the government the responsibility to close some banks that are not technically insolvent, but that are plainly in trouble. On the other hand, I don't think that we have any reason to believe that the dimensions of this crisis are anywhere near as great as the savings and loan crisis. The mistake that both parties made in Washington with the S&L business was deregulating them without proper capital requirements, proper oversight and regulation, proper training of the executives. Many people predicted what happened, and it was a disaster. The banking system in this country is fundamentally sound with some weak banks. I think that our goal ought to be, first of all, not to politicize it, not to frighten people. Secondly, to say that we have to enforce the law in two ways. We don't want to overreact, as the federal regulators have, in my judgment, on good banks so that they've created credit crunches that have made our recession worse in the last couple of years. But we do want to act prudently with the banks that are in trouble. We also want to say that insofar as is humanly possible, the banking industry itself should pay for the cost of any bank failures. The taxpayers should not, and that will be my policy. And I believe we have a good balanced approach. We can get the good banks loaning money again in the credit crunch, have proper regulation on the ones that are in trouble, and not overreact. It is a serious problem, but I don't see it as the kind of terrible, terrible problem that the S&L problem was.
President Bush, 1 minute.
Well, I don't believe it would be appropriate for a president to suggest that the banking system is not sound. It is sound. There's some problem banks out there. But what we need is financial reform. We need some real financial reform, banking reform legislation. And I have proposed that, and when I am reelected, I believe one of the first things ought to be to press a new Congress, not beholden to the old ways, to pass financial reform legislation that modernizes the banking system, doesn't put a lot of inhibitions on it, and protects the depositors through keeping the FDIC sound. But I think that I just was watching some of the proceedings of the American Bankers Association, and I think the general feeling is most of the banks are sound. Certainly there's no comparison here between what happened to the S&Ls and where the banks stand right now, in my view.
Mr. Perot, 1 minute.
Well, nobody's gotten into the real issue yet on the savings and loan. Again, nobody's got a business background, I guess. The whole problem came up in 1984. The President of the United States was told officially it was a $20 billion problem. These crooks, now Willie Sutton would have gone to own a savings and loan rather than rob banks. Because he robbed banks because that's where the money is. Owning a saving loan is where the money was. Now, in 1984 they were told, I believe the Vice President was in charge of deregulation. Nobody touched that tar baby till the day after election in 1988 because they were flooding both parties with crooked PAC money. And it was in many cases stolen PAC money. Now you and I never got a ride on a lot of these yachts and fancy things it bought, but you and I are paying for it. And they buried it till right after the election. Now if you believe the Washington Post and you believe this extensive study that's been done, and I'm reading it, right after Election Day this year, they're going to hit us with 100 banks. It'll be a $100 billion problem. Now, if that's true, just tell me now. Yeah, I'm grown up. I can deal with it. I'll pay my share. But just tell me now. Don't bury it until after the election twice. I say that to both political parties. The people deserve that since we have to pick up the tab. You got the PAC money. We'll pay the tab. Just tell us.
All right, Mr. Perot, the next question, we're going into a new round here on a category just called differences, and the question goes to you, Mr. Perot, and Gene will ask it. Gene?
Mr. Perot, aside from the deficit, what government policy or policies do you really want to do something about? What really sticks in your craw about conditions in this country, beside the deficit, that you would want to fix as president?
The debt and the deficit. Well, if you watched my television show the other night, you saw it. And if you watch it Thursday, Friday, Saturday this week, you'll get more. So, a shameless plug there, Mr. President. But, in a nutshell, we've got to reform our government or we won't get anything done. We have a government that doesn't work. All these specific examples I'm giving tonight, if you had a business like that, they'd be leading you away and boarding up the doors. We have a government that doesn't work. It's supposed to come from the people. It comes at the people. The people need to take their government back. You've got to reform Congress. They've got to be servants of the people again. You've got to reform the White House. We've got to turn this thing around. And it's a long list of specific items. And I've covered it again and again in print and on television. But very specifically, the key thing is to turn the government back to the people and take it away from the special interests and have people go to Washington to serve. Who can give themselves a 23% pay raise anywhere in the world except Congress? Who would have 1,200 airplanes worth $2 billion a year just to fly around in? I don't have a free reserve parking place at National Airport. Why should my servants? I don't have an indoor gymnasium and an indoor